This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Brickell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional, discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Patrick Tuck and Varun Viswanath, the editors behind Reservation Dogs. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Now, you guys have been on this show since the start, if I'm not mistaken.
I have been.
Sorry?
Yeah, I've been on since the pilot.
Okay. So
I started season 2.
I guess now I do want to talk to you a bit about the pilot, Varun, just because pilots are some of the toughest things to cut because you're finding the structure or the approach for the rest of the series and you're trying to fix things as people work problems out. So how did you approach the pilot for Reservation Dogs?
I have to put in the disclaimer here that I was one of 3 editors on the pilot. But also all the 3 of us editors have worked together before on What We Do in the Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of the same team went and did the pilot. It was one of the first to go after all the pandemic lockdowns. And so FX and everybody else wanted to throw more bodies at it to be like, okay, let's make sure this is great. So there are pieces of the pilot that I got to cut, which I'm very proud of. And the pilot itself, I think that it's interesting. This pilot did not go through too many kind of tonal changes or modifications to be like, oh, do we, is this not hitting the right tone from production decisions? That wasn't something that we had to really deal with in post. The one big thing that we did was to add an extra scene with, once we went into series, it was an extra scene that was added to where the bad guy gang or the Indian mafia, mm-hmm. they do another drive-by right as they're coming out of their memorial scene to amp up that rivalry. So that was a reshoot in the while the series was going on. But yeah, the pilot was it kind of just hit us with a surprise. I was like, when we were watching the dailies, like we knew we had a good premise of a show, but then seeing it come alive with all these new faces, and especially the William Knifeman spirit scene, which we always knew was well conceptualized, but to actually see it come together with how much of a wide range Dallas Goldtooth, the actor who plays the spirit, the wide range of improv that he gave us there. I think that was kind of the big, like the keystone of the pilot, to be like, oh, okay, now we know that this is something that everybody can laugh with. And also, kind of that style of the home video style that Bear has when he shoots mm-hmm. For his school, and just that kind of we place the characters so quickly in the in their kind of grandiose view of their own youth and how they have such big ambitions that are beyond the place that they grew up in. All of those things like really caught me very early on. Those are kind of my big memories from the pilot.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
Now, in this episode, this season, episode 3, you guys worked together on it, just to make sure.
We did.
So how did you guys split up the work? Because usually whenever I talk to editors, it's one takes, episodes 1 and 3, and the other takes 2 and 4. And how did this work?
Yeah, this actually was a serendipitous collaboration, mainly because I had a planned 2-week break in the middle of the season, where I had plans with my family, and then on the front end, this episode really took a long time to get through the first couple of stages, because it is such a heavy topic, and the footage of children being in the situations that we show them in, it just took a long time to get through an editor's cut, to get through a director's cut, and we took, I think, 2 or 3x the time that we usually take in a half-hour show, and the people around us were really wonderful in giving us that time. Patrick Vandenbush, our post supervisor, was willing to flex the schedule for this episode specifically because we knew it was going to be a big thing, a big project for all of us beyond just any regular episode that we do. So as a combination of all these things, we weren't able to hit kind of the lock dates before I left on my break. Which is when I handed it over to Patrick to take over while I was away. And so that's how we ended up collaborating on this episode. And I think it turned out way better for that collaboration.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think once it was passed to me, we were really focused on, like, the structural elements were already there and already really well done, and it was flowing really well. We just wanted tonally to reshape some certain segments to keep Dear Lady's motivation alive and moving throughout the episode. So a lot of what I was doing was tonal restructuring in a sense, and a lot of experimenting with music and stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting because we have, I'm in Canada right now, and we're going through reconciliation and what have you with the situations that have occurred with the Indigenous people in our country. And I'm wondering, how do you determine how much to show or how much to reveal, because it's an important topic for people to be aware of? And then how do you determine what to withhold without not disrespecting, but still respecting the original? I think the reason I bring that up is there's the scene where we see the grave being dug. And in Kamloops a couple of years ago, they discovered mass graves of Indigenous youth. And so I'm wondering, that is a very specific sort of difference right there, but it's kind of important to still show people what's happening.
Right. These were questions and conversations we had constantly in the editing process. And we really did take the leads of the Native American creative heads on our show. Dennis Goulet, who's a Canadian director who was the director of this episode. She had a very thoughtful preparation towards what are we going to show and what perspective are we going to take. And all of this in discussion with Sterling, our showrunner. And the perspective that we came into this with was that we want to root this in the point of view of the children going through this experience. So in a way, yes, this is the first time a major broadcast show in the US is broaching this topic. So we knew that we had to be extremely careful about how we do it, but also that we do it as right as possible based on all of our instincts. And the boundary drawn around, we want to show this from the children's perspective and have a representation of what their experience would have been, was our guiding principle in what we wanted to show. In the beginning, we had a lot more that we could understand of what the adults in the boarding school were saying, which we kept clawing back and saying, okay, no, we want their words and their language to be as little understandable to the children, because that was their true experience. And so even as scripted, there were a lot more spaces where we as the audience could understand them in English, but we clawed a lot of that stuff back and gibberish them, as we started calling that, behind the scenes. We gibberished a lot that they were saying to root them in the point of view. So that was our guiding principle.
Well, and that's interesting because that was one of my questions was, did you guys do that mostly in post, or like was it written into the script? And I guess my second question is, did you guys flip it backwards and that was it, or did you guys do more to it?
There's more to it. Oh, go ahead, Varun.
Yeah, just to give you the evolution from the first initial stages of editor's cut and director's cut. Our director Dennis had the actors perform them in kind of written in reverse, syllabically reverse, and they many of the spaces, the nuns do speak on set in production in a gibberish way, which is syllabically reversed. But in many other places, we did just reverse. In Avid, we reversed the audio. But the other thing we also did was we pitched it down so that it is a little more ominous. That I think that really helped a lot. So that was the initial stages of the changes. And I think once it went to our post sound people, they went in and literally cut each syllable and reversed them and put them back together. And Patrick can tell you a little bit more about how we went through that process.
Yeah, I think the sound team at first had experimented with doing, they had recorded ADR that was a different type of gibberish. It was as if they had recorded it on set, where it sounds like it's English speaking, but it's, you don't understand what it is. And they experimented with putting that into it. And when we played it back, it just wasn't feeling right. It didn't feel like that's what was coming out of them. It looked like lip flap a little bit. And it also looked like, it just didn't feel in the scene, So then when we started going through and reversing more of it, it's surprising that when you reverse it, it does actually look mostly like it's coming out of their mouth, and for whatever reason, I don't know if that's like a rhythmic human way of speaking that makes it that way or what, but yeah. So when we were in the mix, we were experimenting with that, and the sound team did a great job. I think it turned out really well.
That was going to be, because when I was watching, I'm like, I think that's in sync.
Yeah, it's weird.
It can't be in sync. And I'm like, did they do it on set or did they do it in post? Because it was very, very interesting to watch and experience.
It was a mix, there were like in the mess hall, they were clearly speaking, in a syllabically reversed script on set. So we didn't have to do anything there sonically except for a pitch shift. But in many other scenes, they didn't quite perform both versions in English and in gibberish. So and since we really increased the number of gibberish instances, that's when we went into this whole process of figuring out the right treatment with with Patrick Hogan and who's our sound editor and his team, on how do we achieve that where it still sounds ununderstandable, but this audience is not looking to understand it. It's not like, hey, did I hear that right? We immediately from the first couple of words, we needed to land this idea that this is not to be understood.
Yeah.
And I think that was a tricky balance that we had 2 or 3 rounds of notes on to make sure that we don't leave anything, anybody in the audience guessing on whether or not they should be paying more attention to try and understand what they're saying.
No, Patrick, you mentioned coming in to do some of the work on the tone. How did you tackle the tone in this episode? Because it is a fine balance to keep people hooked on it and engaged.
I think the big thing was with when I came into it, the cut was at a stage where the present day Dear Lady stuff and the flashback Dear Lady material was sort of feeling the same. It was very somber throughout and very much like Dear Lady sort of reminiscing you know, and less of a feeling of like she was on the way to do something. And so the first thing upon watching it that I noticed was I wanted to feel right from the get-go that Dear Lady was on a mission, you know, that she's on her way to do something, and that these flashbacks are coming back because of that, not the other way around. And so there's a scene where Dear Lady goes into the bathroom and she's washing the blood off of the antler, and it snaps. And we had, so we added a bunch of, you know, like quick cut flashback things to sort of set up our thesis statement for the episode of like, okay, this is happening. It's not really in her control almost, you know, it's something that's coming back that she needs to remember and that we need to see in order to understand what she's going through. And in doing that, it became clearer. And then on top of that, we, Sterling had discovered this artist. I don't know if someone showed him the artist or our music supervisor found her, but an artist named Molly Okosamwen, who has an incredible tone in her work, and her album Sawtooth has this really interesting jazzy feel. There's a jazz element to it, but also there's this like mourning, this feeling of mourning behind the music. And Sterling sent me a Spotify link to that album and said, "Oh, I wonder if any of this would work in the Dear Lady episode." And I listened to the album while not working, which I like to do so that it's more like, oh, I'm feeling it, instead of trying to figure out where I could plug it in. And just realized like, oh yeah, this can work all over the place. So I just started plugging things in, started moving things around. And the opening track of the episode is a Molly Okosamwen track. And there's also, after we figured that out and used another track mid-episode, our music supervisor reached out to her and got some unreleased tracks from her. And one of those tracks is called There There, which is the track that plays as she's leaving James Miner's house after she's killed him, which is worked out beautifully in that it's such an emotional resolve in that sense. But so our whole mission was to sort of juxtapose the present day with the flashbacks much more, so it felt more like we were switching back and forth tonally, and that there was more purpose in that sense.
Interesting. What because one of the things the Indigenous community is very community focused, like it's all about generations handing off information and sharing knowledge. So when you guys were building this season, but like in particular this episode, how did you go about showing these parallels between the different generations?
I feel like this episode is kind of the counterpoint to that, right? It is showing how community was taken away from that generation and many other subsequent generations of Indigenous people. And I think that's how, you know, in serving that contrast, it's very powerful to say, hey, like this is the feeling you get when you get ripped away from your community, when you get ripped away from the cultures and traditions and the day-to-days that make you feel a sense of security. And it is a starting point for intergenerational trauma. So I think that's what we were trying to focus on in showing as far as this episode is concerned. And I think it then ripples forward to, you know, when we do in later episodes, show the community coming together, show generations, you know, pushing each other forward with their wisdom, whether it comes from an elder to a younger, or in many situations in this episode, we have the younger Reservation Dogs pushing their older generations out of some of the trauma that's been holding them back.
Now, is there a particular scene or moment in this episode that was tough to come together, or you were struggling to get it together, that you're really proud of the outcome?
I would say in this episode, I think more than scenes, I think it was the structure of it that was challenging in the beginning, but then very rewarding when we did find it. The script itself was written as larger chunks of with chronology within them. We started in flashback and we stayed there for a while, and then we came to present day. We stayed there for a while. We got into the diner. She started, she met Bear, and then we had a huge chunk of flashback and a huge chunk of present day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it was written. It read very well. It was directed, like that, with a lot of very well thought out scene transitions between present day and past. And but once we put that together, once I put that together in an editor's cut, each scene worked well in itself. And sure, we could swap takes out, change pace here and there, but the larger challenge to solve was the overall structure, where Dennis and I did 3 different versions of progressive versions of restructure, where we ripped the scenes out from where they were originally scripted, out of the chronology that they were, and we said, okay, where can a present day moment and a flashback moment have the most emotional resonance, and does it really need to be in full chunks? Like, do we have to tell full stories in the flashback, where you're to follow the plot of who's who, or do we just use them as emotional fortification of what's going on? And that's the direction that we leaned in. And so the parts that were really that felt very rewarding were finding new places to juxtapose scenes. And I think especially when we had scene transitions that were well thought out before, and we have to reluctantly walk away from them and find new places to do it. And one of them was the axe digging the grave, cutting into the fork, digging into the pie. That was meant to actually go with finding the nun dead in the woods. But since we changed where the flashbacks came in, we ended up using it there. And it worked so well when I did it the first time. Patrick and Sterling doubled down on it and really leaned into, like, okay, this grave digging is gonna be a discordant beat in her head while they're going about their day, and then we cut into the pie, and it really added a sinister nature to what was going on that we didn't have before or hadn't been intended, but we were able to find it in the edit. There were a couple of other places where just finding matching moves, from the diner into the mess hall, using sound to transition, which were all really, I feel like those moments that we were able to find in the editing elevated the flow between the present and the past, while still maintaining that, traumatized, discordant feel that we wanted to get out of our experience of remembering all these things.
What, because before we got on here, you talked about the opening and the ending of this episode changing. What was it that changed?
Well, I'll start off. We had moved a lot of the conversations between we called them like bedside chats, right, between young dear lady and Coda, the child, and we were sort of finding that there was one too many conversations. It felt like a repeat of an emotional beat, and so we ended up conjoining 2 of the scenes where they're having a conversation, and then it's interrupted by the nuns coming in, and they end up dragging him out. That originally was a different conversation that happened before they dragged him out. And so we were getting close to locking the episode, and Varun had just come back from vacation, and I said, "Oh, you have to watch the cut. We're about to lock it. Like, we need your notes on this." Varun watched the cut and had a few thoughts that we absolutely attended to, and then had the genius idea of moving one of those conversations to the end of the episode, which I'll let him take it from here.
Yeah, there was this fishing conversation that Dennis and I were very attached to, but we also couldn't find the best place to put it. It was initially intended to be the kids have this conversation about escape and fishing, and something that was supposed to be them furthering their friendship, and then it was the way it was scripted. It was that after that conversation, you have this hope for them, and then right after that, the nuns come and drag Coda out, and crash it down. So that was the initial purpose of that scene, but it wasn't quite helping us there as much as it could. So it was always a little bit of an orphan child that we didn't know where to put it, but we really liked it. And when Sterling and Patrick were working on it while I was away, that scene didn't find a place. And then when I watched the cut, and they had made the choice to end with Dear Lady driving, which made absolute perfect sense. That's when I had the idea to say, hey, like, what if we put the fishing conversation here? Like, she was remembering a lighter, friendly time. It was a moment of bonding, where they both had something to look forward to. And what if we try to use that at the end of the episode, so we can bring it back to Dear Lady and Coda, and it would give us a moment of levity and hope at the end of a really harrowing episode. And when I pitched that to Patrick and to Sterling, they immediately bit, and they cut it in, and that's how the ending of the episode came about. And in the opening, of course, like, it was Patrick doing those flash cuts after she inadvertently broke the deer antler, and that was something that came together in the editing as well. And I think that really set the tone, like Patrick was saying earlier, of Dear Lady's on a mission. She's on a journey. There's some propulsion behind what she's doing in the present day, and the snap of the antler really just jolts her into the trauma, the traumatic flashback of what happened to her, in association with her becoming the dear lady spirit, and the antler as her weapon of choice in her righteous justice that she seeks out. So I think that opening really tied it really well together and set us up for the journey for the rest of the episode.
Now, I have one last question for you guys. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
I'm a bit of a sucker for superhero things, and I really love watching superhero origin stories. So all the stuff that Disney's doing now on young superhero origin stories, that's my guilty pleasure. Those are all weekly airs, and those are things that I watch literally on the nights that they drop. Doesn't quite fit in the same world as me working on kind of smaller scale intimate comedies that like we do here, but those are my guilty pleasures.
How about yourself, Patrick?
I'd say it's either reality shows, which I watch with my wife all the time because we can talk through them. So like after we both work all day, and then when we go to sit down, we don't really want to watch a show where we want to shut up and pay attention. So we'll put on, whether it's, I don't know, Selling Sunset, Love is Blind. We watch all kinds of reality shows, and I pretend that I'm not watching them. I'm like doing things around the house, but then eventually I'm sitting down and involved in the plot and discussing it with her. And then, or Sex and the City, we watch all the time because that show's just genuinely entertaining and fun to talk about together.
The new one or the original?
Both. We watch both, honestly. Yeah. Well, I mean, the originals, we're much more into, but the second season of And Just Like That was actually very solid.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you guys.
Thank you for having us.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.